Welcome to the Crafty Mini and the next episode of the October Nightmare. So for this one, looking at doing something a bit different. So the idea came to me, what if there's creatures that have been living on Earth a lot longer than we have in our oceans in the deep sea, and they are actually by definition a true Earthling, and we're just something that's evolved afterwards. So that was the idea and the concept behind this creature. So like with all of them, starting off with an armature, getting it covered in a basic amount of clay, and then because of the size of this, and you'll see through the video, so I'll start off with all the detail on the bottom first, which is what I'm doing here, and then bake it, flip it over, and then do the detail on top. So I wanted like a crab-like crustacean shell with these tentacles that come out, and that's what makes it walk, and it lives on the bottom of the ocean floor where there's volcanic activity, and it feeds off all like the microorganisms and things like that on the ocean floor. So after its first bake, the underside detail's done. That larger arm there, which is what originally sits on the base, I end up getting rid of that because I want it to look more like it's scuttling than it is sort of just anchored to a point. But after that part's done, I go in now and I'm adding all the extra clay on top of the tentacles and just adding a load of extra detail and texture. So because this will obviously all pop and show when the paint goes on. Quite a simple creature, this one. It does look a bit like a cross between sort of a head crab from Half-Life and Facehugger at the moment from Alien. Extra bits of clay that I had because I want to get rid of this Fimo and go back to Super Sculpey. So I made some like large rock types, and then I've just gone in with an X-Acto knife here, and I'm just cutting chunks off to make them rigid and flat edges. So when we dry brush them later on, they'll look more like rocks and volcanic stone that are underneath the ocean. All those offcuts as well, because I don't like to waste anything. They all get kept because we can always trim them down to make teeth and things in future projects. They all get put into the little jar with all the extra milliput tentacles and other bits that I've got. So that's it. After it's fully baked, the base is done. It's just hot glued on. As I say, I do get rid of that sort of fifth leg that's keeping it stood up. Not that it's not secure, it's just because I preferred the idea of it scuttling about on the actual ocean bed floor instead. But otherwise, the base is exactly the same. And now we're going to go through the full painting process. And again, like all the other October Nightmare, there's a BPD backstory, so don't forget to check it out at the end. Right, and to get that sort of stony base texture that you can see there, the grey that's on the actual base around the rocks itself, what I've used is it's wall filler that you can get from, so over in the UK, Wilkinson. It's £3 for, just looking at it now, it's a litre tub. And this litre tub now, I've had it for, it technically it's got an expiry date 2015, that's how long I've had it. If it does dry out, you just add a bit of extra water, mix it round, add a bit more water if you need to in steps, and you'll revivify it. Obviously it'd be no good for filling walls, but for making base texture it's absolutely brilliant. And I use this for like basing armies, miniatures, these sort of creatures, anything where I need an earth texture, that's the base layer, and it dries solid because it's designed to fill walls and gaps. Right, so for the colours I want it to sort of mimic its habitat a little bit, and this looks quite garish at the moment, but it gets dulled down quite a lot. So a fleshy colour for the underside of the tentacles, this orangey colour on the top side of the tentacles and like the mouth part underneath, and then this orange all over for sort of like the shell. Sort of like when you see those king crabs, they've got this nice orange colour that makes them pop. And then we'll add all this extra texture and detail in a moment and dull this down because it is very, very bright and garish at the moment. Okay, so the idea is building up the layers, so I'm sponging on in random areas some red, which on the camera you probably can't see it going on too well at the moment, but this all just adds an extra layer and extra texture to it, and that's what we want. We want to build up different shades as we go up, and I'm just concentrating on the raised areas and around these eye things that I've put on the actual miniature. It's quite a simple and effective way, and I'm just using a makeup sponge, which are dirt cheap. You can just use a brush if you want and just be really random with it, or packing foam if you've got any of that lying around. Just rip it open and sponge it on. Really simple technique. And then you can see I'm doing the same again, but with a slightly darker red, and just picking out the centre parts of where I've just put that initial sponging on. And again, the whole idea is just constantly adding layers. If you end up going over anything like, say, on the tentacles there, it's fine. You just go back in with the base coat before you go down and do all the other details. Right, so because the idea is I want this creature to mimic the volcanic rock that's underneath it, because obviously it lives down there in the deep parts of the ocean. So I'm starting to go on really randomly with some grey, and then this will get another sponge on top of this of a glossy black. But this just breaks up the orange, makes it not as vibrant. And if you imagine sort of like, I suppose, like a cuttlefish, how it can mimic the colours and the shapes underneath it to make it camouflage. That's the idea of this thing. So it mimics all the sort of grey rocks, any little small lava flows that might be there. And again, exactly the same thing now, but within those larger grey areas, I'm going in with a smaller amount of the black. And this is just to, again, break it up a bit more, add a bit more of that camouflage. And because it's such a massive contrast with the bright orange, it just makes it pop a little bit more. And just going around all those areas where the grey was, and just putting a bit of black in there, being quite random with it, and it just breaks up that single colour that's on the outer shell. And then just for a bit of contrast, I go back to the original orange, and these are the tiniest amounts, and these are to break up where I think the black's gone on a bit too thick, and it just makes that orange punch a bit more. And again, this is the whole idea of this, you're adding up more textures, more layers, and then when all things like the washes go on, it just makes it all pop. So I've just whited out the eyes there, just because it helps me visualise it a bit better. But they'll actually get a glossy black base coat, because we're going to put some colour shift on. And you can see there how the grey and the black have actually broken up the top layer. So that's the eyes base coated with glossy black, and once they're dry we're going to put the colour shift on top, because they tend to work better on top of glossy black. Right, so I've got this Nebula Copper by Green Stuff World, and this is their colour shift paints. And apparently with an airbrush it's a lot smoother. But with the paintbrush on smaller areas like this, so long as you base it with that glossy black, you have to build up the layers. So I'll put a layer on, let it dry, and then a second layer, and so on. And the eyes themselves, they all got 4 layers in total in the end. And what it does is it's basically the paint's got these little flakes and pigments in that catch the light, and when you move the miniature around, you actually see it goes from like a lovely sort of deep pink to a dark red, and then onto small shades of green where the light catches it. But all the eyes get those 4 coats, and then that's pretty much done. I'll just wash the tentacles with the sepia wash, dry brush them up, and then it's onto the base. Right, so after this initially has had an olive brown base coat, just to tie everything together, and then I'm going to go in with progressively lighter grey coats and just dry brush this up, just catching the edges. First dry brush, as you can see, is quite heavy, just going on all over, and that's catching all the raised areas, pretty much covering the entirety of those larger sharp rocks. As each dry brush layer goes on, it'll actually get thinner and thinner, and I'll take more time and care. So you can see here I'm just taking my time feathering just onto the rocks themselves, and then a little bit on the raised areas on the actual base. And you can see there I've left some channels because I wanted to do some lava flow on the base itself, because it's another technique you can actually do on like your armies and things if you want. If you want like a volcanic sort of base. Now obviously I'm not sure how realistic that is if it was under the ocean. I'm guessing it'd be cooled down pretty quickly, and you maybe not see the vivid colours that'll be on there. But it's a cool effect and it looks nice. And it's another tip, another tutorial that you guys can use for your own miniatures and your own projects. So after all the dry brush, just the base coat, not the rocks themselves, they'll get a black wash. And while that top layer is drying, we're going to do the lava effects now. So I'll start off with a deep red. You can see I'm not being too careful with this, I'm just painting into those channels and that one smaller pool on the side. And here you can see with the orange, the same orange that I used on the actual creature itself, I'm popping that in and letting it blend with the red paint that's still a little bit wet. As you can see, I'm popping it straight in and just moving it around, leaving some of the red showing, and just catching it all around here. And then we'll do the same again now with the yellow. Now obviously yellow is notorious for coverage, but on top of this it's fine because we want it to mix and do different shades of orange and red and things as it's going into all the other paints that are still wet, and it just adds to that lava effect. And you can see I'm just dotting it on, drawing some shapes, just being really random with it, and that yellow just adds a load of vibrancy to the base. And then I go in there with a smaller brush and just start mixing it around a little bit. And then up the sides of these sort of trenches, you want to just paint in a little bit with the orange there as well, just make it catch. As I said, this is a really simple and effective basing idea that you can do. I've used this on a commission piece I did for some, I think they were corn, it was a corn army for Warhammer 40k, and the customer wanted this like volcanic type base. So obviously for the bigger creatures like the bloodthirsters and things, I did something like this. For the smaller, it's the exact same technique, but you just reduce the amount that you're doing, and it all makes it pop in the end. And with the final few little layers that we're going to add on, it looks really nice when it's finished. Right, so on to sort of channel staple, UV resin. This stuff's absolutely brilliant. Just obviously be aware that when you're using it, it does give off fumes, so make sure you're wearing a mask, because it smells nice, but it's completely toxic and not good for you. And you can see I've just done a few test areas, and then I go in there and add the full amount right the way up, and let the UV resin, it'll settle itself, it'll level itself, so don't worry, but filling it right up to the top of the base, and then using the torch just to cure it. If I get any bubbles, I immediately just keep the torch over those areas. So I always check just with the bottom of a brush, make sure, just press a little bit of pressure, and if you see any of the paint swirling underneath, that means the UV hasn't quite cured. So as you can see, I just go back in with the torch and make sure. And that in itself looks pretty good, but there's another step now you do, and it just adds, and it gives you that bit of 3D. Because you always see people do really lovely paint jobs and then they neglect their bases, and you should always do something with it, because it tells a story. So now the UV is completely cured, and what I'm doing now is I'm going in with a little bit of that grey that we used as the mid-tone sort of dry brush, and just painting in random shapes on top of the UV. And what this does, you get those bits of, when you see a lava flow, you get those, I think they're called slag, and they just sort of ride on the top, and it's where the top layer of the rock is actually curing and drying out. And that's what we're mimicking here. So I just put a few random spots about, concentrating on the edges predominantly, because that's where the rock would be coolest. And also if there's any like large cracks or bubbles underneath, I'll use this to cover those up as well. And then on top of that, in the middle of these grey blobs that I've put in, with a smaller brush, and just dab in a little bit of black, and it just gives a colour variation. And when you see the final thing, it makes it pop and makes it look a bit more 3D, and as if this lava's really flowing. There you go, base done. Nice, simple and effective. So we get the monster glued down, and this is it. And this is it, the true Earthling. So stay tuned now. So after this little outro, we'll have all the backstory from the BPD and all that good stuff. Thank you everyone who's watched, liked, commented, subscribed on all the previous ones. This season has done really well, a lot better than I thought it would. So everyone who's contributed to that, thank you very much, it's seriously appreciated. Any ideas, anything you'd like to see me make, or any tips, anything you'd like to know that I've learned over the years of doing all this sort of hobby and painting armies and things, let me know in the comments or message me privately. And we'll see you all on the next episode. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers.
This creature has baffled science since its discovery in July 2021. Found at the ocean floor near the coast of Iceland. It was thought to be a type of crab, but after testing was confirmed to be a new species. It has been moved to the BPD recently, after an incident in the Reykjavik Central Labs. The creature had attached itself to the head of one of the scientists, and through a symbiosis began to use the individual to communicate with others. It appears to be part of a race of crustaceans that have been on Earth much longer than we thought life had existed, roughly 4.5 billion years ago. This is long before we surmised microbial life began on the planet. The creature says its race have watched the evolution of all life on Earth, and were amused to see how humans have become the dominant race upon Earth. It has asked what our intentions to the planet is, and are we aware of the balance in nature that exists, as we are constantly shifting said balance that will have terrible consequences for us and all life on the planet. Within the BPD, we have begun a dialogue with the creature using volunteers for the symbiosis, so we can best understand this ancient creature and hopefully steer our race to a better future. BPD staff are planning an expedition to where it was found with the creature's help in order to contact others of its race. More details to follow.